was a Republican sweep on election night. Every statewide office, including Ohio's top position, all turned red.
Guess what? I'm going to be governor of Ohio!
A huge shift in power is not just happening at the State House. Republicans picked up more than enough seats to tilt the balance in the U.S. House and put an Ohioan in line to become the next House Speaker. So what does all this change mean? Get ready to ride the wave next on Capitol Square.
From Ohio's Channel 4 News, serving Ohio for more than a decade, this is Capitol Square from ONN.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Capitol Square. I'm Jim Heath. Campaign 2010 is now in the history books, and it was a very historic night for Republicans who rode a tidal wave of change, not only in the State House, but also there on Capitol Hill. That wave reached all the way to the governor's office here in Ohio. Republican John Kasich narrowly defeated incumbent Democrat Ted Strickland. And while he won't officially take office until January, he's already getting to work, naming critical appointments and taking on his enemies.
We are very interested in getting started immediately in terms of revenue numbers, the spending, the whole series of things that budget geeks get into. We desperately need to have those numbers so we can really understand where we are from a budget point of view, including where we stand in this current fiscal year and whether we have a shortfall in this current fiscal year, because if we do, we intend to have to deal with that.
Should point out the next budget comes with a projected deficit of $8 billion. And while Kasich and Strickland remained vague about possible solutions on the campaign trail, it's now just Kasich who faces the hard reality of having to make some unpopular decisions. Joining us on this post-election program, Joe Hallett with the Columbus Dispatch, Mark Niquette also with the Dispatch, and Reggie Fields with the Cleveland Plain Dealer. Gentlemen, thank you all for being here in this post-election period. Joe, let me just ask you right out of the gate. John Kasich gets 48% of the vote. Is that a mandate? And if it's a mandate, exactly for what?
Well, it doesn't seem like a mandate, but when you look at the total Republican victory, the voters were saying something. They were saying we want some action. We're tired of inaction on the jobs front, on the economy. And it wasn't necessarily a sweeping endorsement of Republicans. It was a sweeping endorsement of let's try something different. And John Kasich was different. And I think he does have, going into his first term, a lot of leeway to try some big things, to make some big changes. And we will see that out of him. This guy is not a shrinking violet. He will do what he thinks is necessary, and he does think he has the answers to Ohio's problems.
Mark, Reggie, your first impressions of this election?
Well, mandate or not, he has a Republican House now, as well as a Republican Senate, and excuse me, pretty good margin in the House. So, I mean, he'll have the ability to get his agenda through, and we might see some resistance on the part of some members who don't like the idea of having to sell some of these big changes Joe talked about in their districts, but he'll have enough of a conservative strength in the House. He should be able to get his agenda through the legislature.
Yeah, and I think his agenda is what he is promising is going to be so different that I think in 2 years he'll probably be a very unpopular governor, even with Republicans at that point, because of a lot of the things that he wants to do, and he wants to do it right away, as we heard him say just this week. But he's got a 4-year term, so he have plenty of time to kind of make things up if should he want to run for re-election in 2014.
Let's try to break the code. These big changes, Jobs Ohio, which would basically eliminate the Department of Development. Does he slip in the next 60 days to Republican lawmakers an effort to, over time, eliminate the state income tax? I mean, how big are we talking about here?
Well, I don't think you can get to the state income tax right now, if only because, as you mentioned,
there's no money.
The $8 billion hole. I mean, we can't. He's already talked about unfreezing the last slice of the income tax cut that was frozen to balance the current budget, so that's making the situation a little bit bigger. But I think you might see things like more privatization. There's been hints beyond just the Department of Development, things that the private sector could do instead of government. You might see some consolidations in certain government functions. We just haven't seen a lot of specifics of what really we'll be talking about there.
But I do think we're going to probably see a budget proposal from him sooner rather than later once he takes office. I mean, we know that the executive budget has a March 15th deadline, I believe, and I think that he is going to probably try to do something early in his term to try to get this thing through so that he can keep on moving with his agenda for everything else that he wants to do in office. I mean, he's going to get in there and he's going to run like he's running against time, you know, to try to hurry up and make changes.
Yeah, I think we'll see him take on a couple of constituencies that did very well under Democrats, particularly under Ted Strickland. We will see John Kasich take on what he believes is a bloated education establishment. I think we'll see, as he would say, skinnying down the Department of Education, maybe the regents, maybe combining them. I think he'll take on the teachers' unions. As I said, this guy's not going to be afraid to try anything.
All right. On that note, let's. The governor-elect did not waste any time naming his first crucial appointments. We'll put some names up here. Beth Hansen, who served as his campaign manager, becomes his chief of staff. Tim Keene becomes Kasich's director of the Office of Budget and Management. Wayne Struble assumes the newly created position of Director of Policy. What this tells us is that the governor-elect's team is together. They were meeting with the Governor Strickland's staff late in the week. And one Republican lawmaker actually told me privately that they had recommended, Republicans had recommended that he get a budget to them like at the beginning of January so they could begin to put this on the table and let the chips fall where they may. If you're the education community, as you head into the holidays, looking ahead to this new administration, are you particularly nervous in all of this?
Well, you are. First of all, I want to say I was impressed by this team that he's put together. So far, I think these are very competent people. I was heartened by it all because Kasich, as we've all learned during the campaign, is a bit of a bomb thrower and so forth. So that he put together a good campaign team is heartening. I don't think we're going to see a budget right away from him.
Not that quickly.
There's no gain in putting out a budget right now because all it will do is give all these special interest groups and lobbyists a chance to just pick away at it, to build up opposition and make it even more difficult for a Republican legislature to pass it.
Yeah, I agree with Joe, and particularly you look at somebody like Tim Keene, who was budget director under former Governor Taft, knows state finances inside and out, was working with Mary Taylor for the last 4 years, so they should be able to hit the ground running. I also, I guess, agree with Joe that I think it's going to take some time to put that document together and figure out, okay, how do we get this thing balanced? So it might be closer to March 15th.
And Reggie, can you put numbers to, if your goal is to privatize things, when you propose this budget, can you attach some numbers to that? In other words, do we know what possible savings would be in an effort to find $8 billion?
You know, I would presume that they're going to put some numbers to it. I don't know how you assume that those numbers are going to be absolutely correct. I mean, a lot of the things that John Kasich has talked about doing in terms of, he's saying that you can improve the budget situation by improving the economy, by doing some reform sort of things. But a lot of that is not going to be able to occur quick enough for it to have an impact on this current budget that's coming up when he needs to have a budget in hand within, say, the first 60, 70 days or so of him taking office. So that's going to be the crucial thing. It's like, the talk is one thing, but the actual kind of doing is going to take a little time.
Yeah, that's a good point because I think Reggie's exactly right. The big structural changes that we've heard hints about aren't going to get you $8 billion in this next biennium. So it's just going to be a really interesting process to watch.
I want to ask each of you about tone. Let's hear from the governor-elect the night of the election, and then from his first media availability about 24 hours after he won the election.
We intend to take on those entrenched interests, and they will fight back with campaign contributions and all kind of other nonsense, and we need to have our people stick together.
All right, stick together. He had said, actually, the night before when he spoke after his election that he kept emphasizing to Republicans and the Republican partisan crowd that they needed to stick with him and they needed to remain together as a team. And then in that first media availability, he kind of went after the teachers union, made it very clear he was going to take on special interests. So let me just put it on the table. He wins with 48% of the vote, meaning 52% of Ohioans on election day did not want him to be the governor. Is this sort of, we're ready to go tone better? Is it optimal than the We're working with the transition team with the Governor Strickland, and we're going to take our time on this. It just seems like he comes firing out of the gate, having only received less than a majority vote.
Well, as Dennis Green once said, John Kasich is who we think he is. He is the Fox talk show host who is bombastic and says what he thinks, and there's no sugarcoating anything. The day after he met with the press, he went before lobbyists and he said either get on the bus or get run over it. And so the tone of this administration is going to be all business, don't get in my way, help me out. And Kasich throughout the campaign warned people there are no special favors, there are no special interests who are going to get anything out of me. I owe nobody anything, and I'm going to do what has to be done.
Right.
And maybe that's a good thing for the state at this juncture in its history.
Mark, but it is interesting. 52% didn't want you in the job, and now you're making comments 48 hours later that if you're not on the bus, the bus is just going to roll you over. I mean, it's got to be a strategic decision to kind of make the case that regardless of the vote total, I'm here and take no prisoners.
Yeah, no, there's no question a signal was being sent, particularly at this luncheon with all these lobbyists and association groups representing all these different special interests. And as Kasich said more than once during the campaign, people who have their snouts at the trough. That's not to demean anybody, but I mean he was making the point, and it's not inconsistent with what he said during the campaign that there are going to be no sort of special favors, and he really intends to come at this with the idea that okay, I'm going to do what's right, or what I think is right, and we don't really care who it hits.
I mean, Joe is exactly right. I mean, this is who John Kasich is, and people who know him, they know that this is who he is. This is sort of a lot of the rhetoric that we have heard just in the last 48 hours is probably stuff that the Democrats wanted to hear more of during the campaign because they thought that it would work against, John Kasich during the election. He actually kind of toned a lot of that down during the election, but now we're seeing this is exactly who he is, and anyone who knows him knows would probably have known that going into the race.
From the media perspective, and you know this well, Jim, he is going to be very interesting and a lot of fun to cover, but he's going to be very difficult to cover too because they want the media on their terms. They made that very clear in the campaign. We saw, of course, that he did more on Fox News than he did with the rest of us, I guess. Although I shouldn't complain, they did give us access when we asked for it. But it's going to be difficult to cover this administration.
I think you're exactly right. But if you're accessible, you can answer questions quickly, and you can prevent a 3-day story just being a 1-day story if you simply answer the question up front. That's a lesson that politicians seem to sometimes learn and sometimes not. All right, Republicans swept all the statewide offices besides the governor's race. Coming up on Capitol Square, a closer look at the winners and what those key wins will mean for state government during the next 4 years. Keep it here.